Lord knows, but at that time they thought it was unattractive and uninteresting. But it had a peculiar sort of decadent quality about it. And it's a vastly spread out city with no core, no central area, and it had that color of masonry that is peculiar to Southern California that we refer to as dead Spaniard.
Robert Mitchum built a career playing men who looked as though nothing could ever shake them. The slow voice, the calm expression, and the effortless confidence all became part of his image. But behind that famous exterior was a man with very little patience for anyone who tried to control him. According to the story told in the transcript, Mitchum never treated acting as a sacred calling. To him, it was work. You arrived, knew your lines, hit your marks, did the scene, and went home. That attitude made him seem relaxed, but it also put him on a collision course with powerful people who believed Hollywood required obedience. The first great battle came with Howard Hughes. Hughes helped protect Mitchum's career after his 1948 marijuana arrest, keeping him working when scandal could have destroyed him. But the transcript presents that rescue as something more complicated than friendship. Mitchum believed Hughes understood the value of his rebellious image and wanted to control it. What followed was years inside a system Mitchum felt he could not escape. He was tied to Rico while opportunities outside the studio passed by. He wanted greater freedom, but the man who had helped save his career had also become the man controlling where it could go. But not every enemy stayed an enemy. Robert Ryan represented a completely different battle. Both were talented actors, but their approaches could hardly have been more different. Ryan was serious, analytical, and deeply concerned with the psychology behind every performance. Mitchum trusted instinct. Where one man searched for meaning in every line, the other seemed determined not to make acting harder than it needed to be. Their personalities clashed. The transcript describes Ryan as seeing Mitchum's relaxed style as laziness, while Mitchum saw Ryan as someone who took the profession far too seriously. Yet time changed the argument. Years later, after the old studio system had begun to disappear, the two men met again. The anger had lost its power. According to the transcript, Ryan admitted that he had spent years believing Mitchum was the laziest man in Hollywood. Mitchum's answer was simple. He agreed. The rivalry did not disappear because either man suddenly became different. It disappeared because both finally understood what the other had survived. By the end, the transcript describes Mitchum as having developed genuine respect for Ryan. Then came Otto Preminger. If Hughes represented control and Ryan represented artistic conflict, Preminger became the story's breaking point. During Angel Face, the transcript describes a scene involving Gene Simmons. Mitchum was supposed to slap his co-star, but the director allegedly kept demanding a harder and more convincing performance. Again and again. The story describes Simmons becoming visibly distressed while Preminger continued to push. For Mitchum, that was the moment when a professional disagreement became something else. What happened next is told in the transcript as an explosion of anger that ended any chance of peace between the two men. There would be no later drink, no laugh about the old days, and no reconciliation. For Mitchum, at least in the version of the story we are following, respect had a limit. Once that limit was crossed, he was finished. And that same refusal to pretend followed him into another long-running conflict. George Peppard represented something Mitchum appeared to dislike on an even deeper level: vanity. The transcript portrays Peppard as the opposite of everything Mitchum believed an actor should be. Mitchum came from a rougher world, shaped by hard work and an instinctive distrust of people who treated themselves as more important than everyone around them. What bothered him most, according to the story, was not simply Peppard's personality. It was the way Mitchum believed he treated the people behind the camera. To Mitchum, the crew mattered, and that was where the resentment settled. Unlike the conflict with Robert Ryan, there was no moment when the two men discovered common ground. The transcript presents their relationship as one that remained frozen in place. No reconciliation, no late understanding. Just two men who had no interest in changing their minds. Those differences were never small disagreements. They became part of the price he paid alone. The final battle came in 1955. During the production of Blood Alley, the transcript describes William Wellman as a director who was every bit as stubborn and hot-tempered as Robert Mitchum. That may have been the real problem. Neither man knew how to step back once an argument had begun. Tensions on the production continued to build. Mitchum felt disrespected by the conditions around him and by Wellman's aggressive way of directing. Wellman, in turn, expected his lead actor to follow orders. Eventually, the situation exploded. According to the transcript, Mitchum walked away from the production after a furious confrontation, and the role was later taken by John Wayne. It became one of the most dramatic breaks of Mitchum's career. But unlike some of Mitchum's other conflicts, this story did not end with permanent hatred. Time changed both of them. Years later, they met again. By then, the anger that once separated them had become something they could finally look back on. The transcript describes two old adversaries recognizing that they had more in common than either had wanted to admit. Both were stubborn. Both were difficult. Both believed in standing their ground. And perhaps that was why, after all those years, they could finally understand each other. What had once been an explosive feud slowly turned into mutual respect. The men who had nearly come to blows could eventually sit together and laugh about the conflict that had once seemed impossible to overcome. It was a fitting ending to one of the strangest patterns in Robert Mitchum's life. He could fight with people for years. He could walk away from powerful studios. He could lose jobs, contracts, and friendships rather than surrender to someone he believed did not deserve his respect. But he was also capable of changing his mind. That is what makes the story more complicated than a simple list of Hollywood enemies. Robert Mitchum did not appear to enjoy conflict for its own sake. At least, that is not the picture that emerges from this transcript. What he seemed unable to tolerate was being controlled, intimidated, or expected to pretend that everything was fine when it wasn't. That was the line he refused to cross. But beneath every one of those stories was the same Robert Mitchum, the man who never seemed interested in playing the Hollywood game once the camera stopped rolling. That may have been his greatest contradiction. On screen, Mitchum could become almost anyone. He could play a criminal, a drifter, a soldier, a villain, or a romantic hero. But away from the camera, he seemed determined not to become someone else simply because the industry expected it. Hollywood was built on appearances. Mitchum's reputation was built on refusing them. For him, respect had to be earned. Some of the men he fought eventually earned it, others never did. And perhaps that was the real reason Robert Mitchum remained such a fascinating figure. He could appear almost completely relaxed while carrying a storm inside him. He could sound indifferent while holding firmly to a principle. He could walk away from a battle and never look back. Or years later, he could sit down with the same man, raise a glass, and laugh about everything that had happened. The older he became, the more those battles became part of his Hollywood legend. But they also revealed something deeper. Robert Mitchum survived an industry where many careers depended on knowing when to remain silent. He built his own legend by making it clear that silence was not always his style. But according to the story told here, Mitchum would rather live with the consequences of being himself than spend his life becoming someone more acceptable to the people in charge. And in the end, perhaps that was the one battle he never lost. Each conflict exposed the same instinct. Mitchum could compromise on a scene, a schedule, or a job, but the story repeatedly returns to the same point. He resisted surrendering his sense of himself, whatever the consequences might be. Hollywood changed around him. The studio system disappeared. The people he fought with grew older, passed away, or became part of another era. But Robert Mitchum's image remained remarkably consistent. The voice stayed low, the expression stayed calm, and beneath it all was the same message. You could hire him, you could direct him, you could argue with him, but you could never completely tell him who to be.